Okay, so what we want to do is we want to look at Venn diagrams. Okay, so instead of having 3 sections, as we did in 2 circle Venn diagrams, we now have 5 sections. Okay, and so what we realize is area number 1 is M and not S or P. So it's the middle term, but it doesn't represent S or P. Number 2, right here, would be S. Right? So it's a subject, and it would be M, but it would not be part of P. Number 3, all 3 have membership. Number 4, we have P right here, and we have M right there, but we do not have S. Number 5, we have S right here, but not M or P. Number 6, we have S and P, but not M. And number 7, we have P here, but not S or M. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's the rule. And so then the second thing we have to do is we have to say, all right, what do? We always shade first because shading will tell us where the X goes. So keep that in mind as we go through this. When we have a valid syllogism, we draw the diagram for the premise, and then we draw the diagram for the second premise. So we have the major premise, and we draw the diagram for the second premise. If I have to add anything to the premises in order for the conclusion to work, I know it's invalid. The other thing I can do is I can go to page 262 in my textbook. I can look up the mood and figure and know whether it's valid, if it's conditional or it's unconditional, etc. And so keep that in mind. One other thing we want to remember, on an A statement, we shade the whole Pac-Man. Okay, so if it were all S are M, all subject are middle term, I would shade 3 and 6. So we keep that in mind. So that's just one of the rules that you keep in mind. On an E statement, we would shade 2 and 3. On an I statement, we would put the X in the football between the subject and the predicate. And in a 3-circle diagram, because we're not sure whether the membership is in either or, we would put the X right on the line. And then in the 4th, we would put the X on the circle here because it would represent the full Pac-Man. Some are not, would represent the full Pac-Man, and so the X would go on the line representing 5 and 6 being joined together. Okay, so hopefully I haven't lost you yet. So let's see what happens here. So let's look at a couple of things that we can work with. All S are M. So what we're going to do is we're going to shade all S or M, and we're going to do it just the same as we would if it were a 2-circle diagram. So when we do this, we're going to look at this being the middle term, this being the subject, and this being the predicate. Okay, so when we look at this, forget that this circle exists. All we're dealing with is circle S and circle M. So all S R M would be just like a 2-circle Venn diagram, and what we're going to do is we're just going to do that. Okay, so it's not anything out of the ordinary. We're just going to shade those 2 areas. So right here we're dealing with areas 5 and 6. Okay, if we move over to this one, some MRP, what we're going to do is, looking again that this is the middle term and this is the predicate, some MRP, what we're going to do is we're going to put the X on the line. And the reason for that is, once again, we don't know if the M's that are P are in this section or this section, so therefore we're just going to put them, and we combine those 2 sections. So it shows us that we have some type of membership in the football arena. Okay, so let's look at 2 premises. So we're going to go down here to the bottom. We're going to look at no SRM and some PRM. So just for clarity, what I want to do is I want to diagram this. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to diagram no SRM. Dealing only with the S and the M, we would know that no SRM means that we shade this football, right? Okay. Now, what we would do over here is we would look at it and say, okay, some PRM. So if we bring what we did on the other one over to here, okay, I'm listening to my grandson growling at me outside in the hallway. So if we have some PRM, we know that if this is M and this is P, Some PRM, we would know that the X would go in this football in a normal case. However, what we're going to do is we're going to look at it and say it can't be in the shaded part, so therefore what we're going to do is we're merely going to put an X in that part right there. Okay? So that's how we would now diagram premise number 1 and premise number 2. Okay? So now let's move on. Let's see what we can find here. All right. So now what we've done is I've created a couple of syllogisms for us, and I want us to look at these. Notice that the red letters represent the terms. So I have some D are P, some D are M, so I know that D is the middle term. I know that poodles, major premise is major term goes in the major premise. Minor term goes in the minor premise, so we're good to go. All right, so let's look at what we would have to do here. So some D are P, what do we do first? We don't do an I statement. The first thing you always do is the universal statement. So we will shade first, X's later. All dogs are mammals. So let's see. We know that dogs are, oops, I've got to get the little right thingies here. We know that dogs are the middle term. We know that mammals are subject. And we know that poodles are predicate. So all dogs are mammals. So what we're going to do is we're going to shade this Pac-Man. Okay? And remember, we're dealing with only this circle and this circle. Forget that P exists for the moment. Okay? So we deal with all dogs are mammals. So we've got that diagram. Then we say some dogs are poodles. So now we are dealing with this circle and this circle. So if I were just doing two circles, I would have only this football showing. But because this part is shaded, that means that some dogs are poodles is going to be in the football. We shade the X. Only part of the football is shaded. And so that way, now we show that we have dealt with the entire football. So we've got it dealt with here and here. So the entire football is dealt with. If there were no shading here, we would put the X on the line. And then we've dealt with the whole football. But because of shading, now we merely put the X in the number 3 spot. Okay? Now, if I were to diagram some mammals or poodles, that's this circle and this circle. I have an X in the football, therefore I'm done. I don't have to put an X here. All I have to do is that it's represented there. And so therefore it tells me that I don't have to change anything on here. So just using a Venn diagram, I have a valid argument. Now let's look at it and say, okay, but what do we have over here? We have some dogs are poodle is an I statement. All dogs are mammals is an A statement. Some mammals are poodle is an I statement. And then our figure is what? We have the subject of both premises is the middle term. And so if we refer back to page 260, is it 2 in our book, we can look at this and say, excuse me, I want to be on page 261 in our book. I'm sorry about that. We can look at this and say, okay, when the subjects are both the middle terms, we know that it's a figure 3. Okay, so if we go back to our Excel spreadsheet, which I'm trying to do, and we see that we have III, and these are both subjects, therefore we would know without question that this is now a figure 3. Okay, so what we want to do is we're going to go back to, and this is just a way to confirm and to check. If we go back to page 261 or 262, what we find is we find that we have an IAI statement. So what I'm going to do is I'm looking for an IAI. Okay, and we have a figure 3. IAI figure 3 right there. So it tells me that an IAI figure 3 is an unconditionally valid statement. And what that means is that it's valid whether Boolean or Aristotelian. And we call it unconditionally valid. Okay, so there we go. So that gives you an idea of what we've just done. So if we go back to this diagram, okay, and so now we not only did that, but now here we could go over here and we could look at this and we could say that this equals valid. If I can write, it will work. There, how's that? So let's come over here and look at this. So what we have is we have some people are Nazis. We know that Nazis is the um, major term, and it's in the major premise. We know that rich people is a minor term, it's in the minor premise. Okay, so knowing that P is our middle term, and knowing that rich people is the subject, therefore Nazis is our predicate. So let's see how we would diagram this. Some P are N. So I'm dealing only with this circle and this circle. Okay, so some P are N. We know we go in the football, but since there's nothing here, that's why we shade first. Since there's nothing here, I need to include them both. So I put the X on the line. Some people are rich people. Once again, same thing. I know that the X goes in the football, but because nothing else has been claimed in there, I'm going to put, there's no shading, so therefore I'm going to put that there. Okay? So now we look at it and we say, what do we have? We have an I statement, an I statement, an I statement. We know that people is the middle term. We know that it's in the subject arena of the middle term, therefore it makes it a figure 3. So the question is it valid or invalid? Some rich people are Nazis, okay? Tells us right now we have nothing in this football that pertains to this particular statement. Therefore, it's not going to be valid. However, we can go back to our illustration. We can look at I, and we know it's a figure 3. So we're going to look at figure 3, I, no. Figure 3, no. So because it doesn't show up on either one of these, then what we're going to do is we're going to go back here and we're going to look at it. We're going to say, okay, as a result of that, this is, get my pen back, invalid. Okay? So hopefully we're not too far away. Let's think about it. All right? Let's go one more here, shall we? Let's look at this one. All zebras are striped animals. No gorillas. So we know that zebras, I hate when I do that. We know that zebras is that, excuse me, I did that wrong. We know that zebras are the predicate. We know that gorillas are the subject, and we know that striped animals. So all zebras, we're going to do this first. All zebras are striped animals. So all zebras are striped animals. So we're going to shade this part, right? Then what we're going to do is we're going to look at no gorillas are striped animals. Okay, so we know that when you have a no gorillas, that we're going to shade the football. Okay, so now what we need to look at is to say, is it valid? Okay, now here's one of the problems we have. If a circle is 3/4 full, we have to ask about its existence. Okay, so the subject is gorilla, so some gorillas are not zebras, so we have to ask about the existence. So the question is, do gorillas exist? Okay, and if they do exist, then I have to put a circle X in that circle right there. Okay, so do gorillas exist? So now the question is it valid? Okay, so we know that some gorillas are not zebras would mean we'd have to have an X here, right? But because we're proving existence, we know we have to have an X here. Okay, and so as a result of that, we can look at this to say we have an A, E, O, and we know that the figure is, okay, the middle term is in the predicate. Therefore, we know that it is a figure 2. So the mood and figure. And if we go back to this statement, we have an AEO figure 2. So we know that it's conditionally valid. We don't have AEO here, so we know it's only conditionally valid Aristotelian. Okay, and so therefore, when we look at this, we could say that this syllogism equals valid. Okay? The other thing that tells us is because gorillas exist, we've also been able to diagram this so it shows it to be true. Now here's just a little thing. If we have a middle term and we have a subject, and the question is all M are S. Okay, so let's do this. Okay, so if this is the middle